Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the first half of the summit, so the first half of the first day. I certainly did enjoy listening to the keynotes in the morning. This session obviously is the Agriculture and Food Forum. So if anybody is a city person, wants to go to the smart cities or transport, is the other room. This is the Agriculture and Food. But this is actually a very, very exciting place because I think, from what I see, agriculture is the area that lead the way in the IoT space, in technology, and we see wonderful things in the farm getting implemented already. So I will introduce the chair and the moderator of this session, and she will take it from here and introduce the rest of the panel and the presentations. So it's my pleasure to introduce Andrea Koch. Andrea is the principal of Andrea Koch AgTech, an agriculture technology strategy and product development consultancy in Sydney. Andrea is a director with the National Farmers Federation Board and an honorary associate of the University of Sydney. She's from a fifth-generation Australian farming family and is passionate about Australian agriculture. She sees a future where digital technology underpins our farming sector being the most competitive and innovative in the world. She provides consulting and advisory services to anyone who shares her vision, including startups, incubators, research institutions, business, and government. My pleasure to introduce Andrea to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. Yes, as Aidan said, I'm absolutely passionate about agriculture, and I believe that Australian farmers are the most innovative and competitive in the world, and I have a vision that we will remain competitive and become even more profitable and a powerhouse for digital agriculture in the world. So I just wanted to take 1 minute to talk about an initiative that I'm involved in with my involvement with the University of Sydney, which is with the Smarter Farming CRC, which is a bid that's being developed in this current round. And the CRC will work with farming groups and farming communities to develop farm-centric and farmer-informed technology-based solutions to agricultural problems in order to increase farm productivity and profitability. And the CRC is focused very much behind the farm gate, on farms and working with farmers, and not so much on the food supply chain. So if the bid is successful, it will commence in July of next year, and we look forward to having a Farming Smarter CRC session, perhaps in the IoT Summit next year. That's enough about me and what I do. This is the Agriculture and Food Technology session, and it's my great pleasure to introduce all of our speakers today who are absolute leaders in the field. And I'd like to start by introducing Michael Bullen, who is the Deputy Director General for DPI, New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, Agriculture. Michael is responsible for agricultural R&D for the State Government of New South Wales and is currently focused on what the R&D framework looks like for New South Wales and how that is going to drive innovation within the state and beyond. So I'll...
Thanks, Andrea. Hopefully this will work. And what I wanted to do, and I thought I'm probably the last person to start and talk about technology, given my age. I've used this line before, which is my background's forestry, and given my age, I like to consider myself as old growth rather than experienced. It just sort of sounds a little different. But what I thought I would try and do is just give a quick overview of some things that DPI is doing that I'm working on, and then move into, if you like, what are some of the likely issues that will arise as we start to get connected across the farming sector. And I want to touch on science and advances in science that are likely to be significantly influential over the next 10 to 20 years. I want to talk about the way farming works in Australia and our competitive trading situation, and then pose some options or some things that we need to think about for the future. So for DPI, our purpose is to grow the gross value of agricultural production by 30% by 2020. We've hit $15.4 billion already, so we're well and truly advanced. All of us who are involved in agriculture will know we've had some very significant tailwinds over the last couple of years with good seasons and good prices. So our challenge then is, how do we build for the future around that? And I said yesterday when I was at the launch of the yield that technology is going to continue to drive that productivity and profitability of the agricultural sector. The current situation has been driven on the long-term research for the last 5, 10, 20 years to allow farmers to do that. The challenge for the future is, how can technology integrate with that? For us, we focus on, we're the largest rural R&D provider in Australia. We have a portfolio of $500 million of R&D projects. Roughly half of that comes from partner organisations who invest with us on that. We've got a network of research stations across the state and technical staff as well. And one of the things I would like to promote here is that if there are people out there who are working in the ag tech space and want to come and have testbed environments and look at where they can trial some activities and actually put it through the rigours of putting it on a farm where a cow eats the aerial, or a bull pushes against the platform. Thank you. Pushes against the platform that's holding the of technology. Come and have a conversation with us around that. One of the other initiatives that we're working on at the moment is we've recently launched the GATE, short for Global Ag Tech Ecosystem. And we've deliberately used the word ecosystem because we see very much that unless we think about this as a holistic cooperative space, we're not going to maximise the opportunities there. So we've partnered with Spark Labs from Korea, and the Australian subsidiary of that, and set up the ecosystem at Orange. And once again, we're looking to invite people to come in to the ecosystem from March next year, with a view to running a series of programs in conjunction with Spark Labs around that. So now to move to the second part of the talk, or the main part of the talk. And I thought I'd probably start with this quote from Les Murray's poem, Sydney or the Bush. And the main sort of refrain that runs through that poem is, it originally starts around, if you like, a metaphor for the colonisation of Australia and the gap that formed between the Europeans and the Aboriginal community when they came. But then it moves on as to the separation that occurs now. And I particularly like this because it's one of those issues that we continually confront in the agricultural sector, is that if you like, gap between the consumer, and in Australia in particular, primarily around the coast, and the farmers and what's happening out in that particular world. And it sort of leads to where some of the science advances will take us. So, if you like, using that, floating at night and far out to sea, here's 3 examples of recent headlines that have been in there around GMOs on the right and the promotion around that. The $1 a litre milk that's on the top left, and then the role and activity around factory farming. And one, if you like, to just focus on the $1 per litre milk. In my previous role, I worked out at Penrith. The office I worked from was out at Penrith, and walking across to the Penrith Westfield for lunch, you would see trolleys with 9 litres of milk in it. And so these were families out there who were able to buy 9 litres of milk for $9. And the challenge then becomes, you have this focus on what we, if you like, and I'll use the eastern suburbs as an example, what we in the eastern suburbs would like to in terms of the equity around that, but there are real people out there who like the low value and, if you like, they buy on price points. And so, you know, the ability to only spend $9 on 9 litres of milk versus $27 or $30 on 9 litres of milk makes a big difference as to what they're doing. So there's a series of tensions that arise in the agricultural sector. So moving to the next one, and this is around, you know, the mega trends that we're all aware of. But if you like, looking down the right-hand side, there's sort of 5 things that are likely to be big game changers in the science world over the next 10, 20 years. The first one is around the century of biology. I think from last time somebody mentioned that that genetics and genomics is worth about $3 billion in the US economy, whether that's in the human health space or in the agricultural space. So one of the challenges that comes, and if you just think through that, the ability to edit genes, manipulate what's happening in livestock and production systems, creates a huge opportunity to increase productivity and profitability of the farmer. But if you go back to my previous slide around the concerns about GMOs, the challenge then becomes how do we create that common ground? The next one is around the rise of data science, and we're here today to talk about that and start to think about that. As things become more complicated, and we could see from Flavia's presentation before lunch around the intersection, if you like, of rocket scientists and agriculture. And most agricultural scientists are commonly used to saying, well, it's actually not rocket science if you're working in agriculture. Well, guess what? It sort of is now in that space. So having that collaboration and cross-disciplinary approach is going to be really important to solve some of our fundamental problems. The fourth one is around that intensifying competition for talent, and how you are attractive for people to come and work and solve the big problems that may be there. And the last one, if you like, references again that slide around the gap and the common ground around GMOs, and that is around the erosion of community trust in science. And I suppose, you know, a personal example here is that my background's actually in forestry, and, you know, when I graduated from forestry with the rise of the environmental movement and the concerns around how forestry was undertaken, there was never a stage where I could present, I'm a forester, I've been through university, I know what I'm doing and I know what we are doing. There was a huge erosion of trust in the science of forestry as a result of the concerns around the practices. And if you like, that's a small example of where an example of what is likely to continue to occur in that space. So therefore, you can't run a science argument about it's okay, GMOs are okay to eat, because there's this dissatisfaction. And in some ways, you know, the anti-vaccine brigade is a good example of that, where it doesn't matter what evidence is put out, there is just a cohort that are not going to believe it. To now talk about a little bit about our competitive environment. The Australian Export Grains Industry Group over in WA, they do some great work around the competitiveness of the Australian grain sector. And the table I've got up there is a comparison between the Ukraine and Australia. And there's 2 key points I want to make here. The first one is, if you look at the first line, the wheat yield in tonnes per hectare. So Ukraine's is almost double Australia's production per hectare. That then translates all the way down to the bottom line, which is cost per tonne, where the Ukraine is $133 per tonne and Australia is $227. The challenge then becomes even more where the inefficiencies in the Ukraine supply chain are progressively being addressed. So there's large-scale investment from European governments and private sector into the infrastructure and the supply chain logistics in Ukraine. They're closer to large markets in the Middle East and North Africa. So what that means is there is going to continue to be a pressure on Australian farmers to maintain their competitiveness around their productivity and profitability and their sale. Which means, and you know, this is a trite line, I know, but we will never be the food bowl of Asia. We're not big enough, and our costs of production are too high. So we need to think about where is our place in that opportunity for the future. And the final one I want to talk about is a little bit of some work that we've done inside DPI, where we've gone out and interviewed 50 farmers in detail around what would make a difference to their business and what sort of support would they need from government around some of this. And we've characterised and broken down the farmer cohorts into that 2x2 matrix, if you like. And what you can see is that there's a very small number who are connected, and by connected or networked, we mean their relationships and their ability to access information. We don't mean IoT connection. Very small number in the top right. So we have a very small number of people who are networked and working on the business. You can see the majority of the people are working in the business, and they're either isolated or networked. And one of the things that I see very much that the IoT and the connectivity in the IT sense brings is it will hopefully remove farmers from having to spend as much time out there in the paddock chasing down information, looking at how their stock are going, covering 5,000 hectares on quad bikes, in four-wheel drive vehicles, and allow them more time to start to work on the business. I think, to me, that's potentially a missing point that we need to continue to reinforce, is it allows more time to think about the strategic future of the business, as well as having the objective data that's going to be presented as a result of the IoT. And so to sort of sum up the common ground, if you like, and we have the little Lego farmer, we're supporting some projects around that, and that's about trying to get the message to schools, is you can see the farmer's in the middle of two tensions. They're in the middle of the tension around consumers who want information on provenance. They want that there's technology driving a whole series of things. They want to buy and they want cost, but they also want the story. And on the other side, you've got their productivity and profitability tensions around markets, the weather, water access, and the practices that they do. And one of the things that everybody talks about with IoT is it gives greater transparency. And the positive of that is you'll be able to tell the provenance story if you're a producer. The flip side is that people will know where their product and produce comes from. So if you're not operating in a very open, transparent way, then there's a big potential risk to your business. And theoretically now, every piece of packet of meat that you buy from Woolworths or Coles can be tracked back through the biosecurity system to the individual farm where it was produced. And what's been worked on at the moment is how you might do that so you can actually get the linkages through to the system. So if you like, the challenge for the farmer then becomes, what do I do with these technological advances that may give rise to a whole series of questions from the consumers about the way we're managing our farm, the science to maintain our competitive edge in the international markets, and the ability for me as a farmer to maintain my productivity and profitability. So to conclude, I think, and these are some questions and some perspectives that I think we need to think about. I think, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the transparency that comes from the connectivity, and how do we take advantage around that? How do we make sure that we focus on the production systems and think about what they may do and how we might manage that? Are there lessons to be learnt from organic farming? So we, DPI, are in partnership with Southern Cross University up at Lismore around an Organics R&D Centre of Excellence, and the conversation inside the department when we were forming that relationship was very much around, why are we doing that? You know, there's no difference between organics. And my response to the people was, organics work on a low input, low chemical, you know, very, very much a low, not a low cost, but a low input farming system. If we work with that group, we may learn some things that can actually flow back to the more traditional forms of the agricultural sector, and that's got to be a good thing. So I think there are some potential lessons that we can use there. Those advances and how things move through science will need to be managed and very, very importantly communicated. We do have that competitive advantage about being clean, green and the quality that's there, but we need to think about whether that's going to be enough for the longer term. And I think the final one that I would like to leave you with is we need to be able to tell our story. We need to be able to tell our story both inside Australia to the people that are buying our produce here, but we also need to be able to tell that story externally in the major markets, because that's where our continued competitive advantage will come from. Thank you.